We speak now to South Africa's former Statistician-General, Pali Lehohla. A very good evening to Dr. Lehohla, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Let's focus first on the primary responsibilities of Stats South Africa, I believe, is to conduct surveys and collect information from households and businesses. But how does Stats SA's activities really relate to the current POPI Act?
The current state operations actually are cognizant of the POPI Act, even prior to its declaration. In terms of fundamental principles, Principle 6, United Nations Fundamental Principles on Official Statistics, Principle 6 observes confidentiality. All data that State SA has accessed, either of citizens or of institutions, be it a business, is kept in strictest confidentiality. And what is published are just the aggregates in order to conceal and ensure that individual data is not revealed in the process of collection. It is about the statistics and not about the individuals, although the individuals in aggregate represent the statistics.
So is there a difference, or perhaps what is the compatibility between, is it Article Principle 6 of the United Nations Fundamental Principles of Officials, Statistics 3, and confidentiality emphasized in Section 17 of South Africa's Statistics Act? So what are the differences or compatible areas here?
Well, the fundamental principles of official statistics, which are 10, provide the framework, the global framework within which statistics acts have to be drafted. So in section of that talks to confidentiality in the Statistics Act is consistent with the principle 6 of fundamental principles, because the overarching framework is the UN Fundamental Principles for Official Statistics, which is a product of the United Nations Statistics Commission that meets every year to review, amongst others, and improvements on legislation.
So just looking at the amendment bill, I believe parliamentarians were saying that when looking at Stats SA laws and compared to South African domestic laws, there was a finding that 22 were in conflict in respect to data and privacy and data access. Are you able to unpack some of this for us and what your thoughts are?
Well, I'm not sure whether there would be incompatibility, because there is a clause on confidentiality, and that cannot be violated. All data that has to be released to people, if it is a sample survey, the data is distributed anonymized, so you cannot know any one person in the data set. And of course, one has to be very careful when you have different data sets that have been collected at different points in time. It's quite possible, using clever algorithms, to actually identify a particular individual. So Stats SA goes to great pains to ensure that no one individual can be identified, because what it is about, it's statistics, not individuals.
And just in terms of provisions made when dealing with the power and duties of the Statistician-General, of which you were, and the role of the minister in making regulations, are there areas of conflict here? Can the Statistician-General or even the minister, use their discretion in such matters?
No, there is no discretion in this matters. All matters are law, and they are deliberated, and there is the Statistics Council which provides advice. And what the Statistician-General does use, if there is any discretion, the power of that discretion is based on the knowledge, on the fundamental principles and practices of statistics. And then, of course, all that which might look discretionary has to pass the master of the test through the Statistics Council, which advises both the minister and the Statistician-General. The triad embeds creative tension And that tension is very deliberate because each one of the authorities is independent, but that independence is interdependent. So there is no one authority that can act independently because the architecture is interdependent, but each one of them carries independent powers. For instance, the Statistician-General, whenever there are matters, conflict between the Statistician-General and the minister, the Statistics Act of South Africa, it's quite advanced. It says that the Statistician-General will, in writing, say what the discussion with the minister were. And if there was objections, that will be stated in writing, that there were these objections. One of the things that Canada learned from us as SABC was that they didn't disclose the discussions between the minister and the Statistician-General. And in Canada, the census of 2011, the minister decided that the questionnaire will be shorter and thereby violating the rights of the chief statistician-general. But because they didn't have a clause that gives the statisticians the power to disclose, that was not disclosed. But now they have adopted a similar approach to the one of Statistics South Africa.
So
and also they have, I think, a council board.
So the bill that's before Parliament at the moment, as we mentioned in our introduction, that the Reserve Bank is seeking certain information. Now, the Statistics Act, I believe, proposes to introduce a 10-year interval between national censuses instead of the 5-year intervals currently provided in the law. Would this help avert what would be a problem for Stats SA in the Reserve Bank and other entities insisting on information being shared with them that is against the mandate of Stats SA?
Maybe I don't understand the question, but let me probably clarify myself in the following way. The tenure or the interval of when the census is undertaken has a number of considerations. For instance, the apartheid government, when it reverted, or rather it introduced a 5-yearly census from 1975, 1980, 1985, 1990, and then of course we went into 1996. And of course we kept that, was based on the execution of the homeland policy. And they wanted to know whether it is working. So they reduced the interval from 10 years to 5 years in order to monitor that critical aim or policy of a homeland policy. Now, the new government, of course, has also the obligation to monitor as close at interval as possible the developments post-apartheid. But there are a few things that were innovative in Stats SA in this regard. The first innovation was actually coming up with a model projection of the population that is geographically weighted. And that model projection that is weighted provided more precise projections. And we observed this in the period 2011 to 2016. And that enabled us, therefore, to accept and accede to a 10-yearly interval. But in that 10-year interval, there is a midterm census that is big. And that sample is so big that it replaces, or at least it helps in the provision of information at regular intervals, such as 5 years. And the combination of that and the ZIF enabled us to accede to probably a 5-yearly interval, which now the Statistician-General is saying must be mandatory.
Oh, I see.
Now, coming to your question around the Reserve Bank, I doubt whether the Reserve Bank will be much concerned about the time interval of the census based on, or rather the intervals within which the census is undertaken, because they still get the data that they may require from the census. The Reserve Bank largely requires economic statistics, such as income and expenditure. Of course, what has happened, and I have to put on record, is that Stats SA has not been able to run an income and expenditure survey, which has to be run every 5 years. And that survey, the product of that survey, is used by the Reserve Bank to announce on the repo rate, because it is an input into the compilation of the consumer price index. When that survey misses a period of almost 10 years, then you start getting grainy data instead of granular data.
Right.
We've been arguing about this point, and when I was Statistician-General, I know that we actually messed up the CPR, which is a very sensitive measure, because the Treasury couldn't give us the money. It is the same at this point. The danger is more around financing of the statistics institution than what the law says in terms of time intervals of collections of data.
All right. Dr. Lehohla, thank you very much. You certainly understood my question because you answered it very comprehensively, and I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. It was about the timeframes or the value of the information gathered. Thank you very much.